When the orders came through, I didn't hesitate. I packed my gear, checked my documents, and caught my flight out. It wasn't the first time I was being called back. The routine had become familiar, even comforting in its predictability. What I didn't realize was that this would be the deployment I'd remember for reasons that had nothing to do with the uniform. Back home, things were stable. At least that's what I believed. We had a small piece of ancestral land, nothing grand, just a couple of acres that carried the weight of memories more than monetary value. My father had worked that soil, and before him, his father. Land wasn't just property, it was continuity, a thread connecting generations. When I left, I handed the documents to my brother. I didn't overthink it. He was my blood, family. I assumed that meant something. My brother and I weren't particularly close, but we understood each other. He was the one who stayed while I traveled for duty. I thought that made him grounded, rooted in the kind of loyalty that doesn't need to be spoken. He didn't ask for the documents, I offered them. Told him to keep an eye on things, make sure no one messed around with. The boundaries are permits. He nodded like it was second nature. No questions asked. Deployments blur time. Days merge into weeks, and weeks collapse into months. I didn't call often. When I did, I kept it short. Just checking in, making sure everything was steady. And every time, he gave me the same tone, casual, unbothered, even kind. "Everything's fine," he'd say. "Nothing new around here." And I believed him, but there was one call right before the halfway mark that landed differently. I remember it clearly, even now. I had just gotten off a long shift. I called home more out of habit than concern. The phone rang a little longer than usual. When he answered, his voice had a slight edge. Not panic, not guilt, just something held back. He laughed too quickly. Changed the subject too fast. I asked about the land like I always did, and he responded with a quick, almost annoyed, Yeah, it's all good, man. Don't worry about it." I brushed it off at the time. Told myself maybe he was tired. Maybe I was reading too much into a single pause. Distance can play tricks on the mind, especially when you want to. Trust. So I did what I always do. Moved on. Focused on the job. Compartmentalized. But even then, even in that moment, something small took root in the back of my mind. It didn't scream. It didn't accuse. It just sat there quietly, like a thread waiting to be pulled. I didn't know it yet, but everything I'd trusted him with was already slipping through fingers I didn't know he'd extended. And I was thousands of miles away, watching shadows I hadn't even seen take shape. Time passed the way it always does when you're away, slow in the moment. But gone before you know it? At first everything seemed fine. We'd exchange a few messages now and then. Nothing deep, nothing dramatic. Just the usual updates. But slowly those messages turned into one-word replies. In came the delays, hours, sometimes days, before he'd respond. I told myself not to make it a big deal. People get busy. Life pulls everyone in different directions. Still, I noticed it. Wasn't just the texts. Calls started to feel off too. Whenever I reached out, he'd answer like he was in the middle of something. His voice, once easygoing, now came with a sort of background tension, like he was choosing his words too, carefully or trying to end the call before it began. He always had an excuse. Bad signal, tired, running late, didn't press. That's never been my style, but the land. He stopped mentioning it altogether. That's what really stuck with me. For something we both grew up knowing mattered. The sudden silence around it was too loud to ignore. It had always been part of our check-ins, just a line or two. Fence looks good. Rain helped the soil now. Nothing. I didn't accuse. I didn't question. I let it slide, but only on the surface. Beneath that calm, I started doing what I've always done when I sense something's off. I kept records. Every call, every message. Date, time, tone. Not because I was expecting a betrayal, but because something in me needed to stay ready. Not paranoid. Just ... prepared. Sometimes you don't need proof to feel the truth. You just know. It creeps in quietly, like the way someone avoids eye contact without realizing they're doing it. That's how it felt. Like he was avoiding something, and I was pretending not to notice. I started spacing out the calls, not to punish him, more to see if he noticed. He didn't. Days turned into weeks without a word, unless I reached out first. That used to bother me, but eventually it just confirmed what I already suspected. Whatever connection we'd held on to was fraying, and neither of us wanted to admit it out loud. I didn't jump to conclusions. I didn't confront him. I just paid attention. Quietly. Closely. There's something powerful about silence when you stop being afraid of it. It tells you more than words ever could. And in that growing silence, I felt it the beginning of a shift. One that couldn't be undone. It came from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. A neighbor, older woman, grew up watching our family tend to that land. She didn't know the details, wasn't part of the inner circle. But her message was short and strange enough to stop me cold. Strange to see someone else working your father's fields. That was it. No follow-up. No emoji, just a quiet sentence dropped like a pebble into still water. I read it twice before responding. Asked her what she meant. She replied the next day with more detail. Said there'd been trucks. Some men walking around with blueprints. One of them told her they were surveying for future development. She assumed we had sold the land. She said it casually, like it was just another change in the neighborhood. But I couldn't breathe right after reading it. I didn't panic. I didn't call anyone right away. I just stared at the screen and felt a silence I hadn't felt before. The kind that wraps itself around your ribs and tightens, slow and steady. That night I called my brother. No answer. I called again. Nothing. Sent him a message. Can you talk? Hours passed. He finally called back the next morning, his voice perfectly smooth, like we were just catching up. Hey man, everything good? I said yeah. He didn't bring up the land. Didn't mention anything about trucks or buyers or construction. I waited for him to slip, even just a hint of hesitation. But he stayed in control, like nothing was off, so I mirrored him, laid it easy. Told him I'd probably be heading home sooner than expected, that I might take some time off, I said. It lightly, like it was nothing. He paused, just for a second, and said, yeah, that's good, man. You should. I ended the call a few minutes later. Still calm. Still quiet. But inside something had shifted for good. It's not suspicion, certainty. That's when I called an old friend from school. Someone who worked at the local registrar's office. Not high up, but close enough to records to get me what I needed. I gave him the parcel number and asked him to check if any recent activity had been filed. I didn't tell him why, didn't explain what I was looking for, just said something. Feels off. Can you help me look? He agreed. Said he'd check and get back to me within a day or two. I thanked him and hung up. Then I sat with the weight of it. The kind of weight that doesn't come with yelling or rage, just a stillness, a realization. I had trusted someone not because they'd earned it, but because they were family. And now I had to face the possibility that the only thing holding that trust together was already gone. The file was attached to an email. Nothing urgent in the subject line, just a quiet ping late in the evening. It opened with scanned PDFs, official headers, government seals. Nothing dramatic, just clean bureaucracy, the kind that does its damage in silence. As I flipped through them, one thing became obvious almost immediately. My name was on every page, except I hadn't signed a single one of them. The handwriting mimicked mine, but it wasn't exact. It's too clean, too consistent. Whoever did it knew enough to fake it, but not enough to feel it. That's what stung, not the forgery itself, but the ease with which it was done. Like I was a formality, a detail to be handled. The sale had already gone through. The buyer's name sat casually in the corner, someone I recognized, a man I'd seen once or twice at family gatherings, standing in the background near my brother. We'd never spoken directly, but I remembered the way he watched things, quiet, calculating, the kind of person who never says more than he needs to. My brother didn't. Just take the land. He coordinated it, chose someone close enough to trust, but distant enough to deny. It wasn't a spurve, a moment betrayal. It was planned, deliberate. He must have assumed I'd never notice. That being overseas, tied up in duty, I wouldn't have time to check. So honestly, he wasn't wrong. If it hadn't been for that neighbor's message, I probably wouldn't have. That's the part that stayed with me. Not the act itself, but how confident he must have felt pulling it off. How sure he was that I wouldn't question anything, that I wouldn't matter in this equation. That wearing a uniform meant I'd be too far away to protect what was mine. But I didn't respond the way he probably expected. No angry voicemails, no late-night calls filled with accusations. I didn't give him the satisfaction of knowing I'd found out. Instead, I opened a file I'd created years ago, a quiet habit I'd formed after our father passed, and everything was split. It contained every document tied to that land, boundaries, title deeds, notarized agreements, clause I'd fought. For that now read like a quiet warning: no transaction valid unless both parties sign in person, in front of a licensed notary. It wasn't paranoia when I added it, just caution. A small act of protection that now felt like prophecy. I contacted a property lawyer I'd met during a transfer years back, explained the situation, forwarded the documents, and waited. She didn't ask many questions. The signature. Mismatch and procedural violations were enough. We filed for an emergency injunction within 48 hours. Fraud claim. Signature dispute. Transaction freeze. Everything was legal, formal, and completely bloodless. He had no idea, while he was out there thinking the dust had settled, I was laying a foundation he wouldn't feel until it cracked under his feet. Every move I made was deliberate. Silent, the way trust. Once broken, moves not with fire, but with precision. I didn't need to confront him. I had proof. And for the first time in months, I slept without running through conversations in my head. The damage was already done, but so was the response. When I stepped off the plane, there was no excitement, no sense of homecoming. It's just stillness. The paperwork had already gone through. The court had approved the stay order. The sale was frozen. Probably found out the same day I landed, maybe even hours before. Because the moment I arrived at my place, he was already waiting. Not with a smile, not with an apology, just urgency. The kind that doesn't come from guilt, that comes from getting caught. He barely let me put my bag down before he started. Talking, fast, nervous, tripping over his own words. He said it was a mistake. Said he didn't know the documents would go through like that. Said it was temporary. Said it was just until things got better financially. Said a lot of things. And none of them mattered. He didn't ask how I'd found out. That told me everything. He knew what he did. He just didn't expect me to do anything about it. So I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ask him why or how or what he planned to do next. Instead, I handed him a manila envelope. Inside was a copy of the injunction court. Stamped. Legally binding. Simple and cold. He looked at it like it might burn his hands. His mouth kept moving, but the words got smaller. The justifications softened into half-whispers. Started saying things like, "I thought you wouldn't mind," or "You were gone so long," or "I didn't think you'd come back for it." All attempts to shrink his decision into something manageable. But betrayal doesn't shrink. It expands, quietly, slowly, until it fills every space where trust used to live. He finally stopped talking when I didn't respond. We stood there for a while, neither of us moving. Not because there was anything left to say, but because silence had become the only honest thing between us. That moment, him holding the paper, eyes down, words gone, was the only closure I needed. Not revenge, not validation. Just the stillness of consequence settling in. He didn't lose land that day. He lost access to me, to the trust we'd both inherited without earning, to the quiet bond that held us together long after our father passed. People think betrayal ends in screaming. Sometimes it ends in a man realizing he doesn't recognize the version of you that no longer needs to listen. I walked past him, into the house, and closed the door behind me. Not with anger, just finality. Some endings don't announce themselves. They don't slam or echo or cry. They just happen. Clean, quiet, and long overdue court dates came and went like bad weather. Long, tedious stretches, followed by brief, sharp exchanges that never really resolved anything in the moment. He pushed back, of course, tried to settle things quietly at first, offered explanations instead of apologies, brought up financial hardship, called it a misunderstanding. When that didn't work, he shifted tactics, said I was being cruel, dragging family into legal messes over something that could have been handled with a conversation. It would have been ironic if it weren't so calculated. The same man who signed away what wasn't his, now asking for understanding, as if betrayal could be. Softened by tone. I didn't engage. No press statements, no family group texts, no emotional breakdowns. In front of relatives trying to pick sides, the only thing I gave them, or him, was silence. The process dragged. He tried to involve cousins, old neighbors, even a retired uncle who barely remembered how the land had been divided. He built a narrative that made him the victim of paperwork and me the villain of formality. But the evidence held. My documents were clean. The clause was airtight. His signatures didn't match. And the notary who'd signed off on the sale quietly withdrew when questioned. The buyer, once confident and detached, suddenly wasn't returning his calls. Too much attention, too much risk. He backed off. Without a word, eventually the court ruled in my favor. The land was returned. The transfer declared invalid. The title corrected, officially, publicly, and permanently. There was no applause, no victory lap. I didn't post about it. Didn't tell anyone outside the handful who already knew. I had no interest in reliving it for likes or retweets. Instead, I had a new fence installed. It's nothing fancy, just enough to mark the boundary again. Then I left it alone. Let the land breathe. Let the silence settle over it like dust that doesn't need sweeping. He left town not long after. Quietly, no grand announcement. Just packed up and faded into another zip code. I didn't ask where he went. Some people want closure in the form of apology. I never needed that. All I wanted was distance. And for him to live with the shape of what he lost, not land, not money, trust, access. The quiet, undeserved benefit of the doubt he'd once held. Justice didn't roar. It didn't slam down like a hammer. It unfolded slowly, like a door closing behind someone who thought it would always stay open. And I didn't need to say a word, because some answers arrive with silence, and some lessons only sink in when no one is left to argue with. I still pass by the land from time to time, not every day, not out of habit. It's just occasionally, when the road bends that way, and there's no reason not to look. The fence is still standing, clean lines marking where trust was once assumed and then erased. Grass grows a little taller than it should. I haven't touched it much since everything ended, not because I don't care, but because it means something different now. It's no longer just a patch of soil passed down through bloodlines. It's a marker of where the cracks started, of what happens when someone you grew up with stops seeing your absence as temporary and starts treating it as permission. I don't walk the edge with resentment. That's long gone. What's left is something quieter, a kind of respectful distance. The kind of space you learn to hold after you've been taught that proximity doesn't guarantee protection. That family can fail you not through conflict, but through convenience. That land reminds me of what trust really costs when it's handed over too quickly, or expected to hold without reinforcement. It reminds me that silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's a strategy. Sometimes it's strength. The kind of strength that doesn't need to be recognized to be real. There was a time I thought betrayal needed a scene, that to reclaim something, you had to raise your voice. Now, I understand how powerful it is to simply take your ground back and not explain why. And if you've ever stood in that space, the one between trust and clarity, then maybe this story speaks to something you've lived through too. Let your actions do the talking. Let the results be the response. And if stories like this resonate, not the loud ones, but the quiet ones that still carry weight, then feel free to subscribe. You're not alone in this kind of silence.